It arrived on a Tuesday. Clara Wren, journalist for the Northern Post, had just returned from covering a dull city council meeting when she saw it. An envelope sitting alone on her cluttered desk. No stamp, no return address. Just her name typed in faded ink across the front, Clara Wren. She frowned, turning it over in her hands. The paper smelled faintly of wood smoke and something older, like damp earth. Inside was a single sheet, yellowed and brittle. You've been asking the wrong questions. If you want real answers, go to Grimsby Hollow. But hurry, the fog is rising again. There were no other details. No directions, no signature. Just a smudged mark at the bottom of the page that looked like an ink blot, or maybe an eye. Clara laughed quietly, brushing off a chill that crawled up her spine. Probably a prank, or a tip-off from one of her weirder readers. But something about the letter tugged at her. Grimsby Hollow. She'd never heard of it. She typed it into her laptop. Nothing. No town. No historical record. Not even a ghost story on obscure forums. It didn't exist, at least not online. Her curiosity flared. She pulled out her wall map of northern England, tracing her finger along the old trade roads, ancient forests, and forgotten mining towns. And then, near the edge of the moorlands, she found it. A pale scratch, almost invisible, with the faded word Grimsby Hollow, handwritten in ink, centuries old. Clara's heart thudded. She didn't know who sent the letter. She didn't know what waited for her there. But she knew one thing for certain. She was going.
Clara packed light. Just a duffel bag, her camera, a notebook, and a digital recorder. It felt strange to be heading out on a lead with no clear story, no verified facts, just a name and a strange pull in her gut, like someone had whispered her future while she slept. She called her editor, told him she was taking a few personal days. "You're not going off chasing ghosts again, are you?" he groaned. Clara smiled. Something like that. By noon, she was driving north along the A684, the familiar landscape giving way to wild, wind-beaten hills. Her GPS refused to cooperate. Every time she tried to input Grimsby Hollow, it blinked and reset. Eventually, the screen froze completely, showing only static lines and a flickering red dot in the middle of nowhere. She relied on her old paper map instead, tracing the faded trail that wound into the moors. The road narrowed into a gravel path, then to little more than twin ruts in the grass. After 3 hours, the clouds grew low and heavy. Mist rolled in across the fields like silent waves. The trees grew thicker, darker, older. And then, just as she was about to turn back, she saw it. An ancient stone sign half sunk in moss, with barely legible carving. Grimsby Hollow. 1 mile. No population. No date. Clara slowed the car. The fog was growing denser by the second. It moved strangely, as if it were alive, breathing, shifting. She reached a wooden gate. Beyond it, A worn cobblestone road led down into a valley completely swallowed by mist. Her phone had lost all signal. For a brief moment, Clara hesitated. She had no backup, no contact, and no clear idea of what she was walking into. Then she opened the gate, stepped through, and disappeared into the fog.
The deeper Clara walked into the valley, the more unnatural everything felt. The fog didn't simply obscure her vision, it muffled sound. Her footsteps barely made a noise on the cobblestone path. Even the birds had gone silent. After a few minutes, outlines of buildings began to form. Sloped roofs, stone cottages, windows darkened by dust and age. The village looked abandoned. But then movement, the creak of a shutter, the flicker of a curtain being drawn aside. Someone was watching. Clara approached the first visible structure, a small shop with a wooden sign barely hanging on its hinges. Elias and Son, General Goods. She pushed the door open. A rusted bell rang, and the air inside smelled of mothballs and candle wax. Behind the counter stood a hunched old man, his eyes, pale and glassy, locked onto her. "No one comes here anymore," he rasped. "I'm Clara Ellin. I'm a journalist. I received a letter." The man raised a trembling hand. "If someone brought you here, they want something from you. Something you'll wish you never gave." Clara felt her stomach twist. "I'm just here to understand what this place is. Grimsby Hollow doesn't exist on any records." "Good," the man said. "That's the only reason we're still breathing." She tried to ask more, but he turned his back, drawing a curtain that separated the shop from his living quarters. Left in silence, Clara stepped back outside. The fog clung tighter now. She couldn't even see the path she came from. The houses stood like watchful statues. In one window, a girl in a white nightgown stood motionless, staring down at her, then blinked and vanished. A bell tolled somewhere in the distance. 1, 2, 3, 7 slow chimes. But there was no church tower, no visible bell, just sound and mist. Suddenly, Clara felt a hand grip her arm. She spun around. It was a woman in a dark shawl, her face deeply lined. "You should leave," she whispered harshly, "before the fog remembers you." Clara stood frozen as the old woman slipped away into the mist, vanishing between two crumbling stone houses. Her words echoed in Clara's mind, "Before the fog remembers you." It sounded like madness, and yet something about this place was wrong. Every instinct told her so. She turned to retrace her steps, but the path she'd come from was gone. No gate, no cobblestone road, just fog. Thick and endless, curling around her boots like smoke. Clara's breath caught. She spun slowly, trying to regain her bearings. The buildings were still there, warped silhouettes under the pale sky, but the terrain had changed. New paths appeared where there were none before. A crooked alley that hadn't been there moments ago. A lamppost now leaning beside a tree that wasn't familiar. It was as if the village were shifting when she wasn't looking. Panic crept in. She pulled out her phone again. Still no signal, no GPS, no time. The clock showed only a blinking dash. Then she heard it. Footsteps, light, steady, pacing behind her. She turned sharply. Nothing. "Hello?" she called out. Silence, then a whisper. So faint, she wasn't sure if it came from outside or inside her own mind. "You're early." She backed away, heart pounding, until she bumped into a low stone wall. Behind it stood an old iron signpost with 5 arms pointing in different directions. Most of the names were rusted away, but one remained clear. The Hollow Inn. A place to rest, a place to ask questions, a place that might still exist when she turned around. Clara hesitated, then followed the arrow into the swirling gray. The fog didn't part for her. It watched her and quietly shifted the path beneath her feet. Clara finally reached it. The Hollow Inn. It emerged from the fog like a memory, an old stone building with dark wooden beams and ivy crawling up its sides. A brass lantern flickered above the door, casting long, wavering shadows. The door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, the inn was quiet. Too quiet. A fire burned low in the hearth, yet there was no warmth. The flames crackled with a strange blue hue, casting unnatural shapes against the walls. The air smelled faintly of lavender, old wood, and something else. Something metallic. At the front desk stood a tall, slender woman. Her eyes were bright but tired, her auburn hair pulled back into a tight bun.
"You must be Clara Ellin," she said, her voice soft, practiced, as if she'd said it before.
Clara hesitated. "How do you know my name?" The woman smiled faintly.
"It's not often someone new arrives. You were expected."
"By who?" A pause.
"You'll know soon enough,"
the woman replied.
"Would you like a room?"
Clara glanced around the lobby. The faded wallpaper, the staircase that curved upward into darkness, the oil paintings of people who never quite looked directly at you. "I don't plan to stay long," she said. "Just passing through." The woman's smile didn't falter.
"That's what they all say."
Clara signed the guest book. It was old, the ink faded, and to her surprise, there were names. Dozens of them. Some dated back to the 1800s. Others had no date at all. One entry caught her eye. Wren, Room 3, October, 1886. Her breath caught. Wren? Could it be family? Coincidence? She barely had time to ask. The woman handed her a brass key, its tag etched with a single digit. 3.
"Your room is waiting,"
she said.
"Dinner is served at dusk. Don't wander after the bell. The paths shift at night."
"What bell?" Clara asked. But the woman had already turned away, vanishing into a side hallway that hadn't been there a moment ago. Alone, Clara looked up the staircase, then down at the key in her palm. It felt ice cold, and too heavy for its size. Room 3 was waiting. So was something else. Clara climbed the creaking staircase, the wood groaning under her steps like it hadn't carried weight in decades. The hallway above was dim, lit only by a single candle flickering in a brass wall sconce. Shadows stretched and swayed with every movement, like they had lives of their own. Room 3 was near the end of the hall. The door looked ordinary enough. Old wood, cracked paint, and the number 3 carved neatly into a metal plate. Clara unlocked it and stepped inside. It smelled faintly of dried roses and rain-soaked paper. The room was small but tidy. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a writing desk, a wardrobe, and a single window that looked out over nothing but swirling fog. No trees, no buildings, just white and gray that pressed against the glass like a curtain. But what caught Clara's attention wasn't the bed or the view. It was the clock. An old grandfather clock stood in the corner, its carved frame covered in dust. The glass door hung slightly ajar. Clara moved closer. The clock hands were frozen at 12:07. The pendulum dangled lifelessly. She reached out and nudged it gently. Nothing, not a tick, not a sound. She stepped back. That's when she noticed the faint scratch marks on the wooden floor beneath it, as though the clock had been moved, dragged recently. Curious, she grabbed the sides and slowly shifted it away from the wall. Behind it, another door, smaller, older, no handle, just a keyhole and something scratched into the wood above it. He sees you when the clock is still. A chill raced down Clara's spine. She turned back toward the bed and froze. Her duffel bag was open. She was certain she had zipped it closed before going downstairs. Inside it, her notebook lay open. Someone had written a line across the page in red ink. "Don't follow the ticking. It's not time you'll find." Clara backed away, staring at the walls, the ceiling, the mirror above the dresser. She was no longer alone in the room. She just couldn't see who else was there. Clara didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, notebook clutched in her hands, staring at the unmoving clock in the corner. Outside, the fog thickened until it swallowed the entire window, turning the glass into a blank wall. Time felt strange here, stretched thin, like a thread ready to snap. At exactly what she assumed was midnight, the inn's bell rang once, a deep, metallic toll. Then silence. No footsteps, no voices, no creaking from the hallway. Clara stood, adrenaline prickling under her skin. She crept toward the door and opened it slowly. The hallway outside was pitch black. The single candle that once lit the sconce was gone, and the shadows now seemed deeper. Not just dark, but hollow, moving. She took a cautious step forward. That's when she heard it, a whisper, faint, breathy, coming from behind one of the closed doors down the hall. She couldn't make out the words, but she could feel them. Her skin crawled. She turned back into her room and quietly shut the door, locked it. Just then, a soft knock. Not on her door, but from inside the wardrobe. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. Clara stared at it, unable to breathe. Her heart pounded in her ears. The wardrobe didn't open. Nothing emerged. but the message was clear. She was being watched. And not just by something in the walls or fog, but by the building itself. The inn felt alive, a living thing stitched together from wood and stone and secrets. Unable to stay in the room any longer, Clara grabbed her flashlight and quietly opened the window. A cold gust of fog-laced air rushed in. Below, the inn's garden lay still and empty, an overgrown tangle of weeds and headstones. Wait, headstones? She blinked, looked again. Yes, there were gravestones scattered among the rose bushes, each with no name, just a date. And every date was the same. October 13th, October 13th, October 13th, every single one. And the next day on Clara's watch, broken though it was, read October 12th. Clara didn't sleep the rest of the night. She kept the window shut, the lamp lit, and her eyes on the wardrobe. But nothing moved again. No more knocking, no more voices. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the inn breathed around her. The walls seemed to tighten and settle like lungs exhaling. Her dreams, when she dozed, were hazy fragments of fog and fire, of names whispered backward and clocks turning counterclockwise. By morning, if it was morning, she went downstairs. The lobby was empty. No innkeeper, no guests, no sound, except for the low hum of something mechanical coming from somewhere deep within the walls. She called out, "Hello?" No response. Clara moved behind the front desk, looking for any sign of records, keys, or a landline phone. Instead, she found an old journal, bound in cracked leather, marked simply, "Guest Observations, 1849 to present." She flipped through it. Most entries were boring. Room drafty, good tea, too quiet at night. But after 1872, the tone shifted. "He walks the halls again. Heard him outside my door." Something moved behind the mirror. I saw my own face in the hallway, but I was asleep. And then this. "Room 3 is not safe. Room 3 remembers." Clara slammed the book shut. Suddenly, from upstairs, came the unmistakable sound of wood splitting, like furniture being torn apart. She sprinted up the stairs and turned the corner. Her door was wide open. Inside, her belongings were strewn across the floor. The grandfather clock was gone. In its place, just a wall, solid stone, as if no clock or door had ever existed. On the bed lay her notebook, opened to a fresh page. In handwriting that was not hers, one line had been scrawled, "They hear you. Stop writing." The air grew thick, heavy with pressure, and in the walls, the whispers began again. Not faint now, urgent, and they were saying her name. Clara backed away from the bed, her breath caught in her throat. The whispers faded as quickly as they had come, leaving behind a silence so complete it rang in her ears. She needed answers. She left room 3 behind and descended the staircase again. This time she didn't stop at the front desk. She walked past it, deeper into the inn, through a hallway she hadn't noticed before, one that curved unnaturally, like it bent around something too large to see. The air grew colder with each step. Dust clung to the wallpaper like ash. Eventually she reached a door marked "Private, Staff Only." She hesitated, then pushed it open. It led to a basement stairwell. The walls were damp. The stairs were stone, slick with age. At the bottom, a low corridor stretched ahead, lined with shelves of old trunks, broken mirrors, and oil lamps that hadn't been lit in decades. And then, from the end of the corridor, movement.
A figure. Clara froze. He stood tall, impossibly still, dressed in an old-fashioned black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. She couldn't see his eyes, couldn't tell if he was real or something worse. "Hello?" she called, voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head, slowly, unnaturally, as though curious. Then he turned and walked through a door that creaked open for him on its own. Clara stood paralyzed for a moment, then ran after him. She reached the door, but beyond it was not another room. It was a forest, dark, twisted, dense with fog. She turned back, but the hallway behind her was gone. There was only forest now and a trail of footprints leading into it. Black footprints in the pale mist, fresh. She followed. What choice did she have? Clara stepped into the forest, the air changing the moment her foot crossed the threshold. It was colder here, wetter, the kind of cold that clung to your skin and whispered into your bones. The trees were gnarled and towering, their bark as dark as coal. Their twisted limbs formed arches above her, blotting out the sky, if there was a sky. There was no birdsong, no wind, just silence, and the soft crunch of her footsteps on the damp forest floor. She followed the black footprints. They were odd, too long, too narrow. They didn't press into the mud the way real shoes should, and there was no sign of toes or tread. The path narrowed as the fog thickened. Then she saw it. A house. No, a cabin. Small, crooked, leaning slightly to the left, like it had tried to collapse long ago and changed its mind. A broken lantern hung from a rusted nail above the door, and something, maybe wind, maybe breath, made the shutters shudder. The door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, everything was coated in dust, except for the table in the center, which was spotless. Upon it, a stack of letters, sealed, yellowed, and on the topmost envelope, her name, Clara Wren. Do not open before the 13th. She stared at it. Slowly, she picked it up. The envelope was cold and brittle. The ink faded, but unmistakably real. She was about to open it when... Knock. A single knock echoed from the back door of the cabin. Clara froze. Then a second knock, louder, and then a whisper from under the floorboards. "Don't let him in." Clara's skin turned to ice. A shadow passed by the back window, tall, lean, and crowned with the unmistakable silhouette of a black, wide-brimmed hat. She clutched the letter to her chest, heart thudding. Another whisper, this time closer, right behind her ear. "He remembers your name." Clara backed away from the back door, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too close. She held the letter tightly in one hand, the other fumbling for her flashlight. The back door rattled once, twice, then silence. She opened the envelope. The seal broke with a brittle snap. Inside was a single page, handwritten in dark red ink. The paper trembled in her hands as though it didn't want to be read. "Clara, if you are reading this, it means the Hollow has begun to remember you. You should not have come. They warned me too, and I didn't listen. You are not the first Wren to walk this path.
I was here before you, and I'm still here. The man with the black hat is not a man. He wears the memories of those who stayed too long. The fog feeds him what we forget. Do not speak to your reflection. Do not trust the clocks. And above all, do not stay in room 3 another night. Burn this letter, or he'll know you read it. Elias Wren. Her hands trembled. Elias, the guest book, 1886. That name, Wren, her family, her blood. Before she could react, the candle on the table snuffed out. The window panes frosted over, then tap, tap, tap on the glass, slowly, deliberately. Her flashlight flickered as she turned toward the sound. He was there, outside, face pale and stretched like worn paper, barely visible under the brim of his black hat. His mouth opened slowly, too wide, too silently, and moved in sync with her own voice. Clara. She dropped the letter. The figure smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly, like he'd been waiting. Clara stumbled backward, her flashlight flickering madly in her grip. The figure outside the window remained motionless, lips still parted, in a word he shouldn't have known. Her name had never left her mouth since arriving, yet he spoke it like it belonged to him. The letter lay at her feet, the ink already fading into the paper like it was being erased. She grabbed it, stuffed it in her jacket, and turned to run, but the cabin had changed. The front door was gone. In its place was a hallway, narrow, crooked, with wallpaper that peeled in long strips like skin. Old portraits lined the walls, their eyes gouged out. Some of the frames bore names scratched into the wood. She paused before one, a woman who looked uncannily like her. The nameplate beneath read, "Clara Wren returned to the Hollow." Her blood turned cold. Then came a soft click behind her, the sound of boots on warped floorboards. Clara spun around. The man in the black hat was inside now. No door had opened. He simply was. He didn't move toward her. He didn't need to. Clara backed down the hall, not daring to blink. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man tilted his head. His voice, when it came, was wrong, like it had been stitched together from others. "A name is a door. Yours was opened." Clara's back hit a wall. She turned, expecting solid wood. Instead, a mirror. Not her reflection. The girl inside the glass stared at her with wide, terrified eyes, identical to her own. But she didn't move the same way Clara did. She was trapped, silent. Clara gasped. The figure in the black hat drew closer, slowly, each step like a memory being erased behind him. In the mirror, the other Clara mouthed something desperately. Clara leaned closer, trying to read her lips. "Don't forget who you are." The mirror cracked. Clara turned to run, but the hallway was gone. Only fog remained, and through it came voices, dozens of them, some crying, some calling out. One stood out among them, her own. Clara Wren. Room 3. Returned. The fog swallowed everything. There were no walls now, no trees, no cabin. Just endless gray, thick and swirling, humming with the static of forgotten names. Clara ran. No direction, no path, just instinct. The voices followed. echoes of herself, of others, overlapping, whispering words not meant to be remembered, and then the fog broke. She was standing in the hallway of the Hollow Inn once more. Same faded wallpaper, same flickering wall sconce. Only something was off. There was no staircase, no reception desk, just doors. Hundreds of them, all marked 3, room 3, over and over. She turned in place, heart pounding. Every direction led to another hallway of identical doors, stretching endlessly. She tried one. Behind it, her old childhood bedroom. Same worn books, same scratched-up dresser, but everything coated in dust, like it had been left for years. On the wall, a drawing she didn't remember making. A tall figure in a black hat holding her hand. She slammed the door and ran down the corridor. Another room 3. She opened it. A hospital room. Beeping monitors, a figure in the bed, herself. Older, frail. Eyes open but unblinking. The woman beside her, weeping, whispered the same name over and over.
Clara, please come back.
Clara stumbled out, trembling. Another door. A classroom. Desks overturned. Writing scrawled across the chalkboard in red, "You never left." She screamed. The hallway pulsed like a living thing, and from behind her, the steady sound of footsteps. Measured. Inevitable. The man in the black hat was coming. The mirrors on the walls, where there had been none before, showed reflections of Clara walking with him, smiling. In some, she wore the hat. In one, she wasn't there at all. Panicking, Clara pressed her back to the wall, eyes darting for any exit. Then she saw it, a door, without a number. Old, warped, painted black. The only one. She lunged for it. It opened with a sound like breath held too long, finally released. And beyond it, not safety, but the truth.
The black door shut behind her with a hollow thud, sealing out the endless halls of room 3S. Clara stood alone in utter darkness, but it didn't feel empty. It felt watched. She reached for her flashlight. Dead. Her phone? No signal, no battery. But something ahead began to glow, a faint, dull light like fire behind a wall of smoke. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she stood in a chamber, vast and circular, carved from stone, the walls lined with names etched deep into them. She stepped closer. The names were all familiar. Clara Wren, Elias Wren, Julia Wren, and dozens more, all surnames she recognized from old family letters, journals, obituaries. At the center of the room stood a mirror, larger than any she had seen before, framed in rusted silver, its surface rippling like water. And in it, not her, all of her, different versions, different ages, different lives. One wore a doctor's coat, another a wedding dress. One version wept silently, another bled from her eyes. Each stared back, each was trapped. Then a whisper from behind the glass. "You left us behind." Clara stumbled back. The air grew thick and the room began to tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling as the light flickered brighter, revealing what lay at the base of the mirror. A pile of objects, shoes, journals, watches, keys, toothbrushes, all belongings, personal, forgotten,
all of them marked with tags, returned. Then Clara saw hers, her old sketchbook from when she was 8, the one she lost during a family trip. She picked it up, hands shaking, and opened it to the last drawing, a crude, childlike sketch of the Hollow Inn. Windows dark, roof crooked, and in the window of room 3, a black figure watching her. That's when she heard the voice again, right behind her. "Now you remember." She turned, and the man with the black hat stood in the mirror, but this time his face was hers. Clara couldn't move. The reflection in the mirror grinned, her grin, but twisted, too wide, too sharp, too sure. The figure raised a hand, and her own arm lifted in sync, though she hadn't moved. Her body was no longer entirely her own. "You've always been here," the mirror Clara whispered. "You just forgot which side you were on." The surface of the mirror rippled, and then the reflection stepped forward as if the glass were water. Clara gasped, but instead of crashing into her, the reflection simply passed through her like a gust of icy breath. The moment it did, the chamber changed. The walls began to bleed ink. Names that had been carved into the stone started to vanish, letter by letter, as if someone, or something, was erasing them from memory. Clara turned, her real reflection now gone from the mirror. In its place, a door formed, wooden, ancient, the kind used in catacombs. Etched above it in blackened iron, "The price of memory is identity." Something deep inside Clara stirred. The letters, the voices, the dreams, the map of the inn she'd once drawn as a child, the mirror drawings, Elias Wren, all pieces of a puzzle she was born into. She was never just a visitor here, she was a successor. She walked to the door, the mirror shimmering faintly behind her like it feared being left behind. The black-hatted man, or whatever version of her now wore his face, lingered just at the edges of the glass, still watching, still smiling. "Every wren returns. The hollow calls its name." Clara placed her hand on the cold iron handle and pulled. The door opened with a groan that echoed like a scream through time. Beyond it was not the inn, not the forest, but a long stone staircase descending into blackness, carved with symbols she couldn't read, yet somehow understood. Not language, not words, but binding. She took one last look at the chamber. Then she stepped through the door and began her descent into the truth that the hollow had buried long, long ago. The stairs spiraled downward, impossibly long, as though carved through centuries of stone. Clara counted the steps. She stopped at 100. There were more. Each breath grew colder, not the cold of winter, but of absence. Like the warmth of life had been wrung from the air entirely. Faint whispers echoed in the descent, not in English, not in any language Clara recognized, but the meaning crawled into her thoughts like wet roots. One remembers, the rest forget. She walks willingly. The hollow watches. A soft light began to glow at the bottom of the stairwell. As Clara stepped off the final stone, she entered a vast underground cathedral. It was not built, it was grown. Walls of living black wood curled upward into arches. The ceiling breathed, slow and rhythmic, as though the room itself slept. At the center stood an altar made of mirrors, shattered and stitched together with iron nails, and behind it, a tree. Twisted, leafless, enormous. Its bark pulsed with veins of silver light. Hanging from its branches were dozens of keys, old, rusted, humming faintly, each one labeled with a single name etched in bone. Clara walked forward. There it was, Clara Ellin. Her key was different, new, unused, but warm. As she reached up to take it, the tree shuddered, roots shifted. Something in the soil beneath groaned, and a shape began to emerge, part shadow, part memory. From the base of the trunk, a face, Elias Wren, or what was left of him. Eyes sunken, skin like paper, his voice cracked like old glass.
You shouldn't have come this far.
Clara stared in horror. Why am I here? What is this place? He coughed, or maybe laughed.
This is where we pay. Every Wren, every soul marked by room 3.
The hollow is not an inn. It's a vault. It holds the memories the world refuses to carry. Clara looked at the key in her hand. And what happens if I use this? Elias's eyes met hers, full of grief, of warning.
Then you open the final door.
Behind her, the mirrored altar began to crack, and the whispers returned, louder now, all of them calling the same thing: turn the key.
Clara gripped the key, its weight pressed into her palm like something alive, warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The voices surged around her, a dozen different tones all saying the same thing over and over. Turn the key, turn the key, turn the key. Elias Wren struggled to rise from the roots, his body creaking like old timber. Clara, don't, he rasped. You think the truth will set you free, but it only chains you deeper.
Clara backed away from him, eyes fixed on the altar of mirrors. One piece had already fallen free, revealing a hollow cavity behind it, a door-sized gap in the wall of glass and silver. Her key began to glow. She took a step toward the opening. "What's behind it?" she asked. Elias's reply was a whisper, barely audible.
The memory of the first one who forgot.
She hesitated, then inserted the key into the jagged lock behind the mirrors. It fit perfectly. A sound like shattering clocks echoed through the chamber as the altar split down the center, mirrors collapsing inward like broken wings. The light died. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door opened. Behind it, darkness, but not empty. It was the kind of darkness that knew things, that remembered what light refused to. Shapes moved just beyond the veil, tall, thin, unnatural. A voice drifted from the void, soft, feminine, and strangely familiar. "Clara, come see what you left behind." Clara's breath caught. That voice. It was her mother's. She hadn't heard it in years, not since the accident, not since the funeral. Clara stepped through the doorway before she could stop herself. The darkness swallowed her whole, and she fell not down, but inward, through scenes she couldn't control, memories that weren't hers. A young girl with different eyes, hiding under a staircase, a boy drawing strange symbols in the dust, a fire, a scream, a hand reaching out but never touching hers. Then silence. And in the center of it all, a cradle made of roots. Inside it, swaddled in cloth, dark as the void, was a child, sleeping, with Clara's face. Clara stared at the child in the cradle. The baby's chest rose and fell slowly, peacefully, a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling around her. Its features were unmistakable, the same nose, the same curve of the brow, but its skin was pale as parchment, and when its eyes fluttered open, they were empty. No color, no iris, just blank, milky white. "What are you?" Clara whispered. The space around the cradle responded, shifting and reshaping. The cradle morphed into a chair, then a bed, then a hospital gurney. The baby grew rapidly with each transformation, aging in seconds. Toddler, child, teenager, each version flickering through different versions of herself, smiling, crying, screaming, silent, and finally, still. Then she heard it again, that same soft voice from the doorway, her mother's voice. "This is the part of you that stayed behind." Clara turned toward the sound. There was no body, just the presence of memory, warm, loving, and unbearably sad. "You've carried the weight of forgetting for too long. You came back to remember." The world trembled. The figures in the dark began to shift again, shadowy silhouettes with long limbs and hollow eyes. But they didn't approach. They knelt in reverence. Clara looked at them, heart pounding. "Why? Why me?" the voice answered. "Because you're the last wren who still questions. The others accepted the forgetting. Let the hollow take what it wanted. But you ask why." She turned back to the girl, the younger self now motionless in the gurney, and reached out. Her fingers brushed her own, and in that instant the fog inside her mind began to lift. She saw flashes. Her mother boarding a train she never returned from. Her father burning a letter with the inn's name. A childhood fever, voices whispering from her closet as her room pulsed with fog. A mirror long ago that didn't reflect her at all. The hollow had always been inside her, a place, a prison, a gate. Clara stumbled back, breath ragged. The girl on the gurney opened her eyes again, but this time they matched Clara's. Same green flecked with gold, same fear, same knowing. "Take me back," the girl whispered. "Where?" Clara asked. "To room 3. The darkness shifted. Behind her, the mirror door stood open again, but this time it showed the hallway of the Hollow Inn. Normal, lit, waiting. And the black-hatted man? He stood beside the door. Silent, smiling. Clara stood between two choices, the cradle of her forgotten self and the open doorway back to room 3, where the man in the black hat waited with outstretched hand. The girl on the gurney, her other self, sat up slowly. "We have to go together," she said. "Only then can we leave." Clara looked at the man in the hat. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around him was changing, thickening, distorting, like heat rising from pavement, only this wasn't warmth, it was pull. The moment Clara helped the younger version of herself to her feet, the darkness behind them began to collapse, not fade, collapse, like a world finally letting go of a dream it had no right to hold. Clara stepped toward the doorway, and the man finally spoke. "You remember too much now. It will hurt." Clara didn't stop. "Then let it." As she passed through the door, her grip on her younger self tightened. The hallway beyond was not as she remembered. It was alive, walls breathing in sync, lights flickering, not from electricity, but from pulsing veins just beneath the wallpaper. And at the end, room 3. The door was wide open. Inside, the room was exactly as it had been that first night. The fog still coiled in the corners, the cracked mirror on the dresser, the journal on the bed. Except now, there were 2 beds, one unmade, one untouched. Clara led the child inside. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind them. The man in the hat did not follow. Instead, the room began to glow. From within the mirror, symbols appeared, slowly, softly, like ink spreading through water. They weren't words, not exactly, but memories arranged like a language only the soul could read. The girl let go of Clara's hand and walked to the mirror. She reached toward it, and this time the glass didn't resist. Her hand passed through. Clara's heart leapt. "Wait, what happens now?" The girl looked back at her, eyes calm, no fear. "I go back to sleep. You go on." "Will I forget again?" "Only what the hollow keeps, only what it must." The girl stepped into the mirror and faded. And just like that, the second bed was gone. The fog vanished. The wallpaper peeled itself clean. And Clara? She was alone. In room 3. For the first time, truly alone. Then, from under the bed, she heard a click. A key. Her key. Not to a door, but to leave. The key gleamed beneath the bed. Small and tarnished, but unmistakably hers, the same design as before, etched with a delicate feathered insignia, the Wren family crest. Clara reached for it slowly, expecting it to vanish like everything else in the hollow. But it didn't. It was solid, real, cold. The moment her fingers closed around it, the floor beneath her feet gave a soft tremble, and the room changed once again. Not violently, not with the chaos of visions or flickering fog, but subtly, like an old house finally exhaling after holding its breath for decades. The cracked mirror on the dresser healed. The walls smoothed. Even the silence felt cleaner. She stepped to the door, key in hand. The brass knob shimmered slightly in the dim lamplight, and as she slid the key into the lock, it turned without resistance. Click, the door creaked open. And beyond it, not the shifting corridors of the hollow, not another nightmare memory, but daylight. Soft, early morning sun spilling over a quiet forest, birdsong, a breeze, reality. Clara hesitated in the doorway. Behind her, room 3 remained untouched, still, waiting. The bed made, the mirror whole, no sign of the man in the hat, no whispers, no child. Just a hotel room, just a door. She took a step outside. The ground was damp from dew, leaves rustled gently overhead. A winding gravel path led down a slope toward a quiet country road, and beyond that, the distant hum of a car engine. She turned once more to look at the inn. The sign above the porch now read, "The Hollow Inn, established 1891, no longer accepting guests." Its windows reflected nothing, just the trees behind her. And then, a final whisper on the wind, barely audible. "You remembered." And that was enough. Clara stepped fully into the morning light, and behind her, the hollow inn vanished. No sound, no rumble, just a blink. And where it had stood moments before was now just overgrown clearing, vines where the porch had been, wildflowers reclaiming stone. The fog was gone. She was free. But in her coat pocket, she still felt the weight of the key. Just in case. The road was long and silent. Clara walked without looking back again. The hollow inn, or whatever version of it she'd stepped out of, was gone, swallowed by the forest like it had never been there. And yet, it had marked her. The birdsong felt distant, like a memory more than a sound. The sunlight too soft to fully warm her skin. Everything was just slightly off, as if the real world had forgotten how to be real. She finally reached the edge of town by dusk. People moved about, cars passing, children playing, a man walking his dog. It looked normal. Too normal. Like a postcard. Like nothing strange had ever happened here. At a corner cafe, she saw her reflection in the window. She looked older, tired, but her eyes were clearer, sharper. Behind her, in the glass, she half expected to see the man in the hat watching, or the girl, or the room. But there was only her, alone. She entered the cafe, sat by the window, ordered a coffee. Her hands still trembled faintly. As she waited, she opened her bag, needing something, anything to ground her. Inside, tucked between the folds of her journal, was a note. Yellowed, folded precisely. Not hers. She opened it slowly, in neat, careful handwriting. "The hollow does not forget what you choose to carry. E.W." Her uncle. Still alive? Still trapped? Or was the message a remnant, a fragment left behind for her to find? She turned the paper over. A sketch was drawn faintly in pencil. It was room 3. From memory. But different. The bed was pushed aside, a trapdoor drawn beneath it, and next to it, scrawled in small, almost desperate writing, "One door closed, another will open. Always." Clara folded the note and slid it back into her journal. The waitress brought her coffee with a smile. "Long trip?" she asked casually. Clara stared at the steam curling from the cup. You could say that. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the thing that had nearly kept her forever. But she knew. And somewhere, in the roots beneath forgotten inns and strange places across the world, the hollow was waiting and watching. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in a rented motel room off the highway. Generic, sterile, forgettable. And yet the silence pressed down like the air inside the hollow inn. She kept the light on, the mirror covered, her journal on her chest like armor. But when sleep finally came, it brought no dreams, only the sound of roots growing beneath her bed. She woke in a cold sweat before dawn, heart pounding. Just a dream. She told herself that over and over. But when she stepped onto the carpet, she felt something brittle snap beneath her foot. A twig. A single dry root. She left the motel 10 minutes later without checking out. She spent the next few days in the town's historical library, digging into records, names, properties, death certificates. She needed proof, something to convince herself that what she'd experienced had happened, that Elias Wren wasn't just a hallucination, that her childhood hadn't been rewritten by fog. And finally, buried in microfiche from 1964, she found it. Missing, local man vanishes near Whispering Pines. Elias Wren, 27, was last seen boarding a southbound train after reportedly receiving a letter from a long-abandoned property once known as the Hollow Inn. Family members claim he suffered from vivid hallucinations and memory disturbances before his disappearance. The article ended abruptly. No follow-up, no body found, no trace. Clara sat frozen. The room around her seemed to pulse. She flipped to the next file. Deaths at Hollow Inn, 1894, 1911, 1928, 1952. All guests, all vanished under strange circumstances, each case different, but always the same room number, 3. A pattern older than her, older than Elias, maybe even older than the inn itself. And then something else, tucked in a folded piece of library scrap. Another handwritten page. She didn't put it there. It was waiting for her, in the same handwriting as before. The hollow is not a place. It's a pattern, a seed. It finds cracks in the world and grows. Your memory is the soil. She stood abruptly, heart hammering, the page trembling in her hand. Someone else had been here, someone who knew she would come, someone still playing the game. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the reading room. Empty. But behind her, faint and impossible, a voice. Familiar, low, playful. Careful where you dig, Clara. Clara left the library with the note clenched in her fist, the words burned into her mind. The hollow is not a place. It's a pattern, a seed. She no longer questioned the strange notes, the voices, the perfectly timed arrivals of messages. Something was orchestrating it, guiding her, or testing her. Back in her motel room, she laid everything out. The journal from room 3, the old articles, the 2 handwritten notes, and a map of the region. She marked all the locations mentioned in the records, disappearances, unexplained gaps in memory, even old asylum case files. A pattern emerged. All of them occurred within an 80-mile radius. The hollow didn't stay in one place. It moved, or perhaps it grew. Clara drew a connecting line between 3 of the points on the map: the Hollow Inn, Elias's last known location, and a now-destroyed train station that burned down in 1921 under mysterious circumstances. The triangle was too precise. At its center, a patch of dense forest known locally as Blackwood Hollow. She hadn't been there since she was a child. Something inside her stirred, a memory long buried. Fog, trees, a voice singing a lullaby she couldn't place, and the sound of someone digging. She drove out to Blackwood Hollow the next morning. The roads were narrow and cracked, and the woods leaned in close, like they were eavesdropping. There was no formal entrance, no trail markers, just a break in the trees, almost unnatural in how perfectly it split the wall of green. Clara stepped inside. The forest was unnervingly quiet. No birds, no wind, just stillness. As she walked deeper, she noticed the trees weren't entirely normal. The bark on some pulsed faintly beneath her fingers, like veins beneath skin. Some had symbols carved into them, the same symbols from the mirror in room 3. They watched her, not metaphorically. Some of them had eyes, not human, not animal, just wrong. She should have run, but she didn't, because she recognized something ahead. A clearing, a stone arch, a rusted sign that had once said Blackwood Lodge, but now had been scorched, rewritten by time and fire into something else. The Hollow welcomes all. The fog began to rise, and in the center of the clearing was a trapdoor, half buried in dirt and moss, just like the one in the sketch from the note, waiting for her.
The trapdoor was old, wood rotted, hinges rusted, but somehow intact, as if time had passed differently here. Clara hesitated only once before kneeling down. Her fingers traced the edges of the hatch. There, burned into the frame, was the feathered crest of the Wren family again. Elias's mark, her mark. She gritted her teeth and pulled. It opened with a low groan that echoed deep underground, like it was awakening something. The smell hit her first, earth, rot, and memory. Then the stairs came into view. Not stairs exactly, roots, twisted into steps, descending into blackness. Clara switched on her flashlight and began to climb down, each step echoing behind her like a heartbeat. The deeper she went, the quieter everything became. Even her breath felt stolen from the air. After what felt like minutes or years, the narrow tunnel opened into a massive subterranean chamber. The walls pulsed with light, living walls, breathing fog, and in the center stood something impossible. A mirror, tall and jagged, its frame made of bone and bark and rusted wire. It wasn't glass, not really. It was liquid, dark as ink, shifting constantly. Reflections surfaced and vanished. Elias, her younger self, the man in the hat, her mother, arms open, her father burning the letter, the Hollow Inn, room 3, and beneath it all, roots, endless roots threading through all of them like veins through flesh. This place, this mirror, was the core, the Hollow's heart. Then, a voice behind her. "You shouldn't have come alone." Clara spun around, and there he was, Elias Wren, older, paler, eyes sunken but alive, wrapped in a threadbare coat, hands stained with earth and ink. She couldn't speak. He stepped closer, reaching into his pocket, and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He opened it slowly. Inside, another key. "There's still one door left," he said softly. "The one we all forgot." The key in Elias's hand was unlike the others. It shimmered faintly, not with gold or metal, but with something deeper, like light trapped in water. Its teeth weren't cut in straight lines, but in sharp, erratic patterns that made Clara's eyes ache if she stared too long. She reached for it, but Elias pulled it back. "You can't take it unless pence." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "What is it?" "The last door," he said. "The Hollow's true mouth, the one that doesn't let you walk away." Clara felt the roots shift beneath her feet. "You're alive," she said. "All this time you've been down here?" Elias looked away. "Not entirely. Not all at once." "Then come back with me. We can destroy this place, end it." But Elias shook his head, smiling with a sadness that aged him in an instant. "You still think it's a place." "The Hollow isn't somewhere you go. It's what waits for you when the world no longer makes sense. A wound in reality, a riddle left unanswered for too long. The mirror behind them rippled, and then for the first time spoke. Clara. It said her name with 1,000 voices. Child, adult, dream, grief. She turned. The surface of the mirror showed a room, not room 3, her bedroom, as it looked now. Today, the window open, the lamp on, the journal still sitting on the desk where she'd left it. But something was wrong. Someone was sitting in the chair, head bowed, hair like hers. And then it lifted its face, her face, but hollow, pale, eyes completely black. It's already opening, Elias said quietly, whether you're ready or not. Then help me close it. He paused, then handed her the key. If you walk through this door, you may not come back the same. But you might finally remember everything. Clara turned to the mirror. The surface no longer showed her room. It showed the hallway outside it, and the black-eyed version of herself was walking toward the door, from the inside, from the hollow. Clara gripped the key and stepped forward. The moment the key touched the mirror's surface, it didn't pass through. It sank, like it was being swallowed. Then the surface shuddered, cracked like ice, and shattered inward with a soundless explosion. Wind rushed through the underground chamber, pulling at Clara's hair and clothes, drawing her forward into the dark beyond. She looked back once. Elias stood still, already fading, roots winding around his ankles. "What happens if I don't come back?" she asked. "Then the hollow wins," he said. And then she stepped through. There was no sensation, no fall, no sound, just being. When her feet touched ground again, she stood in a long, narrow hallway. Familiar, too familiar. It was her childhood home. But colder, darker. The lights flickered. Shadows clung to the corners like smoke. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with doors, none of which had been there in the real version. Clara turned slowly. Each door had a label, carved deeply into the wood. Regret, forgetting mother. The fire room. 3-3. A cold breath touched her neck. The hallway moaned like a creature trying not to scream. From behind the door marked "Forgetting," a familiar melody played. A lullaby. The one her mother used to hum. But her mother had died when she was 6, hadn't she? The door creaked open on its own. Inside, a child's bedroom. Her old toys. The wallpaper with blue moons. A small girl sitting on the floor humming to herself. Clara's throat tightened. No. The child turned around. It was her. No black eyes, just wide, scared ones. "Why did you leave me here?" the little girl asked. I waited for so long." The walls began to close in. Shadows poured through the corners, whispering her name. Her heartbeat thundered. She knelt by the child, herself, and took her hand. "I didn't forget you," Clara whispered. "I just couldn't remember."
The room pulsed with light. The shadows screamed, and the hallway collapsed into white. Clara opened her eyes. She was back in the subterranean chamber, the mirror gone, Elias gone. Clara emerged from the roots beneath Blackwood Hollow just before dawn. The sky was bleeding into pale blue. Morning birds cried softly in the distance, as though uncertain whether it was safe to sing again. Her boots were soaked in earth. Her hands were scratched. Her heart felt like it had been peeled open and sewn shut again with trembling fingers. But she was whole, for the first time in years. She stood in the clearing, staring back at the mound that had hidden the trap door. It was gone. No entrance, no roots, just moss and leaves and silence. Like the hollow had swallowed its tongue, but Clara knew better. It wasn't gone, only dormant. Back in town, she showered, slept for nearly 16 hours straight. When she woke, the mirror in the motel room showed only her. No shadows, no echoes. She didn't speak much to the clerk at checkout, just smiled politely and handed him the key. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "I found what I was looking for." He raised an eyebrow. "And what was that?" Clara paused. "Myself." Before she left town, she visited the cemetery one last time. Her uncle's stone was still there, but now someone had left a note beside it, in familiar handwriting. "Memory is a door too. Keep it locked and you forget who you are. Open it, and sometimes you find the key to everything. E." Clara folded the note and tucked it into her coat. As she walked away, she didn't feel watched. She felt accompanied by all the versions of herself she had left behind. The scared child, the grieving niece, the defiant woman, walking beside her like shadows in the sun. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could live. But far away, in a different part of the country, a boy entered a small, forgotten roadside inn during a thunderstorm. The sign above the desk flickered, "Room 3, available." And somewhere, in the cracks of the world, the hollow opened one eye and smiled. Clara didn't go back to her old apartment. She moved into a quiet flat in a new town, somewhere coastal, where fog rolled in without malice and trees didn't whisper her name. She bought a used desk, hung up art she didn't understand, started writing again. But the dreams returned. Not like before, not nightmares, just fragments of doors, of names she didn't recognize. And sometimes, in the morning, she'd wake to find pages in her notebook filled with words she didn't remember writing. Always the same line at the bottom: "The hollow never dies, it waits." She tried to live normally. Grocery runs, long walks, morning coffee with strangers who smiled too easily. But every so often, Clara would notice patterns, A stranger holding a black umbrella on a sunny day. A barista with eyes that didn't blink. A child whistling a tune she remembered from her dreams. And worse, her phone started ringing, always at the same time, 3:03 a.m. No caller ID, just silence. Until one night, she answered. At first, static, then a whisper. Not a voice she recognized. The doors still open. She hung up and threw the phone across the room, but it rang again and again, until finally she answered with a scream. "What do you want?" Silence. Then, "You let it out, Clara." Click. She drove to a payphone the next day and dialed her old number, just to see. It rang 3 times, then picked up. But she didn't hear her voicemail. She heard breathing, and behind it, faintly, a lullaby. The same one from her childhood, the same one from behind the forgetting door. Clara slowly lowered the receiver and stared into her own reflection in the glass booth. But it wasn't her. Not exactly. The woman in the glass had her face, but older, eyes too wide, a smile too patient, waiting. The hollow hadn't been sealed. Clara started locking every door, not just at night, always. Bathroom, closet, even drawers. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation, because she'd begun to hear them. Not just voices in dreams, footsteps, floorboards creaking, faucets dripping red when no one had used them, a shadow flickering past her hallway, too fast to follow, too real to ignore. One morning she found muddy footprints in her kitchen, small ones, children's. But she lived alone. No sign of a break-in, no open windows, just prints. And a single phrase scrawled on her fridge in ash. "We missed you." The phone kept ringing. She stopped answering. So the calls stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. Because it wasn't empty. She felt it every time she blinked too long, every time she stared at a mirror for more than a few seconds. She started seeing faces behind her. Not her own, not entirely, distorted like memories seen through dirty water. A woman with her eyes, a man with Elias's hands, a child with no mouth and hands made of bark. And then one night, a knock at the door. Clara froze. She didn't move for almost an hour. Another knock. Then a voice, muffled but familiar. "Clara, it's me, Elias." But when she looked through the peephole, no one was there, only fog, thick and clinging, like the woods at Blackwood Hollow. She stayed awake the entire night. The next morning she opened the front door, and sitting there, wrapped neatly in black twine, was a journal, her name burned into the cover. She opened it slowly. Inside, sketches of doors, notes she hadn't written, and a map, hand-drawn, of her new apartment, floor by floor, labeled with the words "entry points." And on the last page, "The hollow doesn't need to take you, it just needs you to listen." That's when she heard it, from inside the walls, soft at first, a scratching, then a whisper.
"Let us in." The whispering didn't stop. It grew louder each night, spreading from the walls to the floors to the back of her skull, like it was being broadcast from inside her bones. Clara tried everything. She turned up music, slept with earplugs, burned sage, poured salt along the windows and under doors. Anything she remembered from childhood stories and desperate internet threads. Nothing worked. Because the whispers weren't outside anymore. They were inside. One night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch, staring at the journal, now open to a page she hadn't remembered turning to. There, drawn in ink that shimmered faintly, was a door she'd never seen before. Its frame was made of mirrors, its handle a gnarled root. Above it, a single word: home. Beneath the drawing, "You've already opened it. You just haven't walked through." The lights flickered. The whispering turned to chanting. She stood, moving almost unconsciously toward her hall closet, the one she always kept shut. The knob was cold to the touch. She hadn't opened it since moving in, hadn't needed to, but now it was pulsing, like something was breathing behind it. She turned the knob. The door creaked open, and inside, no coats, no shelves, just darkness stretching endlessly. The hallway again, the one from the hollow, but now in her home. Behind her, the phone began to ring, again and again. Clara didn't answer. She stepped into the closet and kept walking. The door swung shut behind her. Click. In the silence that followed, the apartment remained still for hours, until just before sunrise, the phone picked up on its own. And from the receiver came a voice. She's home now. Clara walked for what felt like hours. No lights, no echoes, just the soft sound of her own footsteps, and something that followed just out of sync. The hallway didn't bend or branch. It simply descended. With each step, the air grew colder, thicker, like she was walking through the lungs of the hollow itself. And then it changed. She emerged into a room. It looked like her apartment. Same walls, same floor, even the same faded couch, but off. Too quiet, too still. The colors were muted, like a photo bleached by time. And the windows, they showed nothing, just fog swirling endlessly beyond the glass. There was a sound, scratching, from under the floorboards. She knelt, placed a hand against the warped wood. It vibrated, a heartbeat, not hers. Then, without warning, the floor split and she fell. Clara hit ground hard. The space she landed in was dimly lit by flickering candles placed along the walls. Carvings covered every inch, symbols she couldn't understand, looping patterns that twisted if she stared too long. Some were identical to the ones in the journal, others pulsed faintly, as if aware of her presence, and in the center of the room, a chair. Someone sat in it, tied, head bowed, breathing. Clara approached, slowly. Elias? The figure lifted its head. It was Elias, but not the one she had met beneath the hollow. This Elias looked younger, terrified, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Clara, is it really you?
She rushed to untie him, but the ropes weren't ropes. They were roots slithering under his skin. "I thought you were part of it," he whispered. "It showed me things, versions of you, of me. It keeps us here, by memory, by guilt." "How long?" she asked. He didn't answer, but his eyes said, "Too long." The walls began to hum. The candles flickered blue. Clara stood up and turned slowly. Another version of her stood at the edge of the room. Not the child, not the black-eyed woman. This one was weeping. Her face cracked, her arms bleeding ink, her mouth whispering a single word again and again. "Stay, stay, stay." The room began to shudder. Elias screamed, "It's not just a place." The floor heaved beneath Clara and Elias like a living thing, exhaling shadows and moaning through the cracks. The walls twisted inward, covered in carvings that pulsed with blue, then red, then black. The weeping version of Clara stood still, her eyes hollow now, bleeding ink. Her mouth opened wider than it should, an impossible O that stretched to her collarbone, and from it came a sound not meant for human ears. A chant in a language older than memory. Clara staggered backward, dragging Elias with her. "There has to be a door," she muttered. "Every nightmare has a door out." "This isn't a nightmare," Elias gasped. "It's a root system, a living memory. We're caught in its core." The room began to bend, not metaphorically, literally. Corners pulled upward, the ceiling stretched away. The carvings shifted into faces, some familiar, some not, all watching. Then, in the center of the floor, a crack split open. Not a wound, a mouth. And it spoke. "You came looking for yourself, Clara, and now you found all of them." Hands emerged from the fissure, not dead, not alive, but made of fog and bone, fingers like branches clawing the air. They reached for Elias first. Clara stepped between him and the hollow. "Take me," she said, "not him." The hands paused, then laughed, a dozen voices overlapping. "You think you have a choice?" Suddenly, from Elias's coat, the journal slipped free. It landed open, pages fluttering violently. Clara saw something new, a sketch of this very room, and scrawled across the center, "Name it." She understood instantly. "You said it feeds on memory and guilt," she said, turning to Elias. "What if we don't give it that anymore?" "Then what do we give it?" She looked at the weeping version of herself. "Truth." She stepped into the center of the room and screamed, "My name is Clara. I am not broken. I am not lost, and I am not yours." The walls shattered, the floor cracked wide, swallowing the mouth, the hands, the shadows. The hollow screamed, a sound like forests burning, like children crying through tin can phones. Clara grabbed Elias's hand. "Run!" They sprinted through the collapsing chamber. The tunnel beyond had returned, the same long hallway of doors. Only now the doors were closing, one by one. Boom, boom, boom. Each one slammed shut as they passed, until finally, at the very end, a single glowing exit. They dove through it. Clara landed on her apartment floor. Sunlight poured through the windows. No fog, no whispers, no distorted versions of herself, just morning. The days that followed felt unreal. Clara woke up at normal hours. She drank coffee that didn't taste like ash. She and Elias walked along the coast, where the fog no longer whispered, but drifted gently, peacefully. They spoke of everything and nothing, the strange looping of memory, the faces in the hollow, the way it built entire realms out of grief. But still, Clara felt something wrong. Not fear, not guilt, a hollow ache. One night, as she and Elias sat on her rooftop, watching clouds drift past the moon, he broke the silence. "Do you feel it?" She looked at him, startled. "What?" "The absence. Like it left something behind." Clara nodded slowly. "It's like a bell that stopped ringing, but your ears keep echoing." They sat for a while longer, letting the breeze play with their silence. Then Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out the journal. It had changed again. The pages were blank, every single one, except the inside cover. There, scrawled in black ink, "Not everything was meant to be closed." Later that night, Clara dreamed. But this time, she wasn't in the hollow. She was in a library. Endless, towering shelves, no ceiling. The books hummed. She walked through it until she found a mirror, and inside her reflection stared back. Older, yes, but stronger, solid. Until the reflection blinked, and didn't stop. Its eyes kept closing over and over. And then it whispered, "You left the door open." Clara jolted awake. The apartment was silent, except for one sound. A knock at the closet door. Slow, measurement, insistent. She stared at it. Then, finally, she walked across the room, stood before it, hand trembling, and whispered, "I closed you." The knocking stopped, but then a voice replied, her voice, from the other side. Not all of me made it back. Behind her, the pages of the journal began to fill again, one by one. Sketches, symbols, warnings, and a list. Names. Clara's name, Elias's name, and others, people she hadn't met, not yet. The hollow had been wounded, but it wasn't gone. It was growing, spreading through memory, looking for open doors. And Clara? She had just become its first survivor. Or maybe its messenger. The list in the journal grew each day. Clara never wrote in it. Neither did Elias. But every morning, new names appeared, written in that same uneasy, spidery hand. Some names were ordinary. Some were crossed out. Some bled through the paper like they'd been scratched in with something alive. Each name came with a symbol beside it. One Clara recognized from the hollow, carved into stone walls and door frames, now burned into paper. She began researching the names. At first, nothing, but after days of searching, a pattern emerged. Disappearances. People who had vanished from towns near old forests, abandoned places, or fog-heavy coasts. Each name on the list had a trace: a blog post, a missing person flyer, a friend's desperate forum comment. They'd all been forgotten or erased. The hollow wasn't just feeding on Clara or Elias, it was using them to map something bigger. "It's not just memory anymore," Elias said, scanning the names. It's spreading through people, through stories, through us. Clara closed the journal and held it tight to her chest. Then maybe it's time we stop hiding. You want to fight it? No, Clara said. I want to warn them. They created an anonymous site, a blog at first, then videos. Clara wrote down everything she remembered, every door, every version of herself, every rule. Never answer a call you don't remember dialing. Don't stare too long into your own reflection after a dream. If something knocks twice, don't answer. If it knocks 3 times, run. The hollow doesn't take you all at once. It takes your story first. At first, people laughed. Trolls filled the comments. But then came the messages. I've seen that door. My brother disappeared in 1997. His name is on your list. What does it mean if they whisper my name through the floor? Clara answered every message, even the disturbing ones, especially those. One morning, she woke to find her own photo posted to the blog. She hadn't uploaded it. It was of her asleep, taken from outside her bedroom window. No caption, no user tag, just a title. We see you, Clara. Tell our stories right. The hollow wasn't angry. It was watching, and it had given her a job to remember, or maybe to become the next door. Clara stopped sleeping, not because she was afraid, but because sleep became a door. Every time she closed her eyes, she was somewhere else. Not the hollow exactly, but places like it. Warped houses, mirror worlds, school hallways lined with whispering lockers. Places that felt almost real until something looked directly at her and said her name. Clara doesn't belong here. She's not lost enough. But she will be. Elias was changing too. He had started drawing again, compulsively, obsessively. Pages and pages, rooms with no exits, people with blurred faces, roots growing through eyes and mouths. When Clara asked him why, he only said, I don't remember doing it. But they feel like pieces of people the hollow took. She began to realize something. The journal hadn't been a book of warnings. It was a map of unfound people. And now she and Elias were part of it, cartographers of the forgotten. Then came the letters, handwritten, delivered with no return address, different handwriting each time. One read, The girl with the moths in her mouth. She's still alive. She remembers the river. Help her. Another, If I vanish, don't let them say I was depressed. That's not how it happened. I opened the wrong door. I said yes when I should have run. Another, just a drawing, a child's stick figure holding hands with a tall shadow. The name below it, Tess. Clara felt sick. She remembered Tess, a name from the hollow, a voice that cried out once just before silence fell like fog. We have to find them, she told Elias, or their memories will become the hollow. And if they already have, then we bring them back anyway. That night she had a dream. In it, she stood in a library again, but this time the books were people.
rows and rows of human-shaped shadows, bound and silent. Each wore a tag. She ran her fingers along their arms until she found one with a name: Tess R. Harper. Clara whispered to the figure, "I remember you." The figure breathed, and all around her, so did the others. For the first time, they moved, reaching for her. One whispered, "Keep going. You're opening the shelves." She awoke, gasping. The mark appeared on Clara's skin the next morning, a faint spiral just below her collarbone. She hadn't felt it happen. It didn't hurt, it just was, like it had always been there, waiting to be revealed. Elias stared at it uneasily. "That symbol, I've seen it before. It was on one of the bodies in the hollow, the one that kept whispering even without a mouth." Clara touched it gently. It was warm, not to the touch, but from within, like it knew something, like it was alive. "The library chose me," she said, more to herself than him. "But why?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the answer, because Clara remembered, and in the hollow, memory was currency. That day she wrote names again, but now when she wrote them she saw images, like flickers behind her eyes, places tied to each person. One name, Noah Reyes, brought the vision of a train station, abandoned and echoing with a distorted announcement repeating, "Last call, last call, last call." Another name, June Avett, conjured the scent of burnt hair and a crib spinning with moths. Every name led to a memory pocket, and Clara, she could step into them. Not physically, not yet, but she could sketch the architecture of where they were lost. The spiral burned again that night. She fell asleep at her desk and dreamed of the library, but this time it had expanded. More shelves, more shadows, and a desk just like hers at the center. Sitting behind it was someone new, a child, eyes too old, fingers stained with ink. The child smiled at Clara. "I kept it for you," they said, "until you were ready." They slid a ledger across the table. Inside were hundreds of names, and a blank space beside each, like an unfinished sentence. Clara picked up the pen and wrote next to one, "Remembered." The figure smiled. Shelves groaned, and one of the shadows stepped forward, free. She awoke with tears in her eyes, and beside her on the desk was a new item that hadn't been there before, a library card, aged and yellowed, her name typed across the top, a spiral symbol in the bottom corner. On the back, in handwritten ink, "Return what was lost. File what can't be saved. Never forget a name." The hollow wasn't gone. It had simply outsourced its memory, and Clara had become its new archivist. The more names Clara wrote, the more fractures appeared in the world. Not cracks in the walls, no, cracks in reality. At first it was small things. A hallway in her apartment that should have ended at a wall now continued for 2 more doors. Street signs, spelling names she hadn't spoken aloud but had written the night before. People on the street who watched her for too long, as if recognizing something ancient in her face. But then came the rooms. They began appearing in ordinary places. A supply closet at the grocery store opened into a room of flickering televisions. A bathroom stall at the university revealed a staircase leading downward, infinitely. A mail truck parked on her street had no driver,
only postcards from people who shouldn't exist. Clara knew what they were. "Memory vaults," she whispered. Each room belonged to someone whose name was on her list, a shard of identity trapped in a loop waiting to be archived or unraveled. Elias discovered one in his own home, a mirror that reflected his childhood bedroom even though he hadn't lived there in years. But the boy in the mirror wasn't him. "He asked me if I remembered where we buried the teeth," Elias said, pale. "I didn't answer. I didn't want to know." The hollow wasn't just expanding, it was curating. And it was using Clara's memories to rebuild what it had lost. They decided to test it. They visited a name from the journal, Avery Kane, a high school student who had disappeared in 2004. The address linked to Avery was a burnt house, long abandoned, surrounded by ivy. Inside, the air was too still, the ash undisturbed. But in what should have been a bedroom was a single unburned closet door. Clara reached out, and the doorknob turned easily. Inside was a room frozen in time, posters on the walls, a desk lamp flickering, homework half complete, a music player looping static. A girl sat on the bed, facing the window. "Avery?" Clara asked. The girl turned slowly. Her eyes were blank, but her mouth moved. "No one remembered me," she said softly. "So I stopped having shape." Clara stepped forward. "I remember you. I found your name. That means you're not lost." Avery blinked, and for a moment, her eyes cleared. "Then file me. Please." Clara closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the library, found the shelf marked A, slid Avery's memory, her room, her voice,
The rooms were multiplying. Each name Clara filed was another wound in the hollow's skin. Not one it bled from, but one it remembered. And beneath the surface of the library, beneath the shells and the echoes and the whispers, something shifted. A presence. Not malevolent, not kind, just old and watching. Clara first noticed it in her dreams. While shelving a memory fragment, a boy trapped in a carousel that never stopped, she felt something behind the stacks. Breathing. She turned once, saw nothing, turned again, and the spiral on her chest flared hot. From the dark, a voice whispered, "You're rearranging the cage." She stepped back, startled. "Who's there?" No answer, only a low vibration like stone shifting. She awoke, gasping, hands clutching her collarbone, and on her palm, smeared like ash, was a symbol, a spiral inside a spiral cracked in the middle. She didn't tell Elias. Not at first, but she didn't have to. He was changing again, more withdrawn, his sketches darker. "I'm starting to see them when I'm awake," he said one night, eyes rimmed in red. "The ones we've filed. They pass by like commuters in a station, silent, watching." Clara hesitated. "Do they seem different?" Elias looked at her, a long, slow nod. "Like they remember something we don't." That night, the library spoke, not in words, not in symbols, in movement.
Shelves began rearranging themselves in her dreams. Entire wings vanished, new ones appeared, spiraling downward. A staircase now wound below the main archive, carved in stone, ancient. Each step downward made her chest ache. The spiral burned brighter. And at the bottom she saw it. A door. Not like the others, this one was made of bone and rusted hinges. From the other side came the sound of 100 clocks ticking out of sync whispers that spoke backwards, and her own voice saying, "You opened too much." When she touched the door, it pulsed, not in warning, in invitation. And above it, etched in rotting silver, "The first lost." She woke, screaming. The spiral on her chest now split slightly at the edge, like a crack had begun to form. She finally told Elias everything.
He didn't flinch. "I think it wants you to find it," he said softly. "The thing buried beneath memory." Clara stared at the journal. New pages had begun filling themselves again. No names this time, just one word, "down," repeated over and over. They both knew what it meant. The library wasn't just a place to store the lost. It was a vault. And something had been sealed at its deepest point. Now, because of Clara, it had noticed the lock was failing.
They waited until nightfall. Not because it was safer, but because the library was more awake then. Clara didn't dream her way into it anymore. Now, when she stepped through the closet in her apartment, the one that never quite closed, she entered it awake. Elias followed, notebook in hand, spiral drawn on his palm. He said nothing, but Clara saw the fear in his eyes. It mirrored her own. The spiral on her chest throbbed with every step. Down. That was the only direction now. The staircase beneath the main archive was older than anything they'd seen. The air grew thick. The books turned to stone tablets, each etched with screams, symbols, and fragments of names. The deeper they went, the more warped things became. One hallway led back to a memory Clara had never lived, her own funeral. Another opened into a room where Elias stood motionless, watching dozens of versions of himself, whispering, looping, scratching messages into the walls. But the spiral on Clara's chest pulled them forward. It was guiding her now. Or perhaps it had always been. At last, they reached it. The door of bone and rust, set into a wall of black stone that pulsed like a heart. It towered over them, humming with a frequency they couldn't hear, but could feel in their teeth, in their spines, in their thoughts. Above the door, the phrase had changed. Now it read, "Here lies the first story." Clara approached. The spiral on her chest cracked further. Elias grabbed her arm. "Clara, what if this isn't a door?" "And what is it?" "A mirror. A memory of something that should have stayed forgotten." She placed her hand against the bone, and the door breathed. Not opened, breathed. A sound echoed from within. A voice she recognized, though it didn't belong to anyone she knew. Yeah, the hollow was never a place. It was a question. And you are the answer it waited for. The door unlatched. Bone dust fell like snow. Inside, there was no room, only a void filled with spirals, moving in endless recursion, collapsing into themselves. Suspended in the center was a figure, human-shaped but eyeless, mouthless, with symbols carved into its skin, one for every forgotten story, every unspoken name. Clara stepped closer. She took the spiral, and the void collapsed inward. When she awoke, she was alone. No Elias, no staircase, no library. Only the journal beside her, open to the final page. Written in the neatest, calmest handwriting she'd ever seen. Filed, Clara Ellin, first keeper, last memory. Clara no longer lived in the world the way others did. She walked the same streets, past the same people, but the light fell differently on her now, as though the sun remembered her differently. Inside her chest, the spiral had sealed, not broken, not burning, whole. She no longer needed to write names. They came to her on their own, whispered by passing wind, etched into raindrops on windows, scribbled in dreams not her own. And with each name came a choice. File it, forget it, or set it free. The hollow had not disappeared. It had simply settled, folded into the spaces between what we see and what we forget. It was quieter now, not cured, but at peace, because Clara was watching. One day, years later, though time bent oddly around her, Clara found a bench in a park she'd never seen before. An old man sat there, holding a worn notebook. His face looked familiar, too familiar. He glanced up and smiled. "Do you remember me?" Clara tilted her head. The spiral pulsed faintly. "Yes," she whispered. "Elias." He nodded, eyes misting. "I thought I was gone." She reached into her satchel, pulled out the journal. No longer a cursed ledger, but a living thing. Pages bound with memory, breath and ink. She opened it, found the name. Next to it, in her own hand, she wrote, "Filed, remembered, released." The wind sighed. The leaves rustled with a whisper of thanks. And Elias smiled one last time, then faded like fog at dawn. That night, Clara stood at the mirror. Not her own reflection. She hadn't seen that in a long time. But behind the glass, the library waited. Spirals spun slowly. Shelves rearranged themselves. And in the far distance, something stirred. Not dangerous, not forgotten, just waiting. She placed the journal on the shelf behind the mirror. The final shelf. The last entry. The library pulsed, once in acknowledgement, and then stillness. For the first time in centuries, the hollow slept, not in fear, but in memory. The world would forget Clara Ellin. That was always the price. But one name would remain. etched in the bones of the library, whispered through the spiral winds, not as a warning, but a reminder. There is always someone watching, someone filing the forgotten, someone keeping the stories alive. And if, on a quiet night, you hear your name carried on the wind, don't be afraid. It only means you've been remembered. The end.